Medical workers, what's the craziest lab result you've seen in a patient? Welcome to the video. Make sure to subscribe and watch until the end. You won't want to miss these unbelievable stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy watching. Story 1. The pulse was 8 beats per minute. We thought the device was broken. We checked it on ourselves. It shows normally. We look at Grandma again and she smiles. Is something wrong, son? How could she even talk with such a heart rate? We urgently called a cardiologist. It turned out to be a complete heart block. A pacemaker was installed. Now she lives, but jokes. I'm like a robot now. I run on batteries. Story 2. The exercise capacity of 200,000 after training. The muscles were literally disintegrating. The norm is up to 200, and here it is 1,000 times more. I pulled my thigh muscles and got rhabdomyolysis. My kidneys could barely cope with the products of muscle breakdown. The Mayo Clinic diagnosed me with McArdle syndrome, a rare disease. Now I tell athletes, listen to your body. It is smarter than your ambitions. Story 3. Monday morning after the vacation, I'm sorting out the accumulated tests when the laboratory assistant comes running up with a test tube. Look at this blood. It's strange. I take it in my hands. Instead of the normal red color, the test tube looks like pink jelly. The plasma is cloudy, stratified into fractions with a yellowish layer floating on top. Triglycerides are 83/4 with a normal value of up to 150. The patient is a 30-year-old man who has been on a keto diet for 3 months, eating only lard, butter, fatty cheese, and sausages. He thought he was doing something healthy. The blood turned into a fatty emulsion, and the heart pumped this sour cream through thin vessels. When the cardiologist saw the results, he said, "The vessels are like pipes after draining fat into a sink, completely clogged." Statins, a diet, and the elimination of all fats were urgently prescribed. A month later, the blood was cleared, and the patient lost 15 kilograms. Now he is a nutritionist and talks about the dangers of extreme diets. Keto almost killed me, but it taught me to understand my body. His story has become a classic example at the medical university of how healthy eating can be deadly. Story 4. It's Sunday, 8 in the morning. I'm on duty at the children's hospital and playing Tetris on my phone when a nurse from the emergency room runs out of her office like a scalded man. "Come quickly, a child with strange seizures." I run thinking of ordinary epilepsy, but the picture turns out to be much more complicated. A 10-year-old boy is lying on the couch, twitching periodically, but he is talking, answering questions, even joking with his mother. I measure his blood pressure. It's normal. His pulse is also normal. There is no fever. I order a blood test, hoping to find an infection or electrolyte disorder. An hour later, the laboratory assistant brings back the results. Sodium 185, while the norm is 135 to 145. The child is hypernatremic. The brain swells from excess salt. I asked the mother about the diet. It turns out that she had read on the Instagram blog of a naturopath about the benefits of sea salt for children with neurological problems. The boy had a mild form of ADHD, and his mother decided to treat naturally. She added sea salt to all his food for 2 months. Cereals, soups, even fruit sprinkled with it to strengthen the nervous system. The little organism could not cope with such a load. The kidneys did not have time to remove excess salt. I urgently transferred him to the intensive care unit, prescribed a salt-free diet and drips with distilled water. Sodium should be reduced gradually. A sharp drop can cause brain swelling and coma. 3 days of struggle, daily electrolyte monitoring, and gradual normalization. On the 4th day, the seizures stopped. The boy became active and cheerful. His mother was crying. "I thought I was doing something useful, natural, safe. How could I trust some blogger more than doctors?" Now she writes her own blog about the dangers of self-medicating children based on advice from social media and regularly speaks at parent-teacher conferences about critical thinking in medicine. Story 5. I watch a vampire series at night, munching popcorn when the phone is ringing off the hook. CFC 212,000, is it possible? With a normal value of up to 200, this means that the patient's muscles have literally melted. I throw some popcorn and go to the hospital. A young guy is lying in the intensive care unit, complaining of pain all over his body. I find out that he decided to work out over the weekend, doing squats with heavy dumbbells for 4 hours in a row. Rhabdomyolysis. The muscles broke down into components, the decay products poisoned the kidneys. The urine is dark brown like Coke. With such a CK level, the kidney should fail in an hour. Urgent hemodialysis, liters of saline for flushing. A week later, geneticists find a mutation, McArdle syndrome, a disorder of glycogen metabolism in the muscles. During physical activity, the muscles do not receive energy and simply collapse. The guy now does yoga and swimming. Muscles taught me that strength is not about heavy dumbbells, but about understanding your body. Sports doctors show his tests as an example of what happens when you ignore the body's signals. Story 6. It's Friday morning, 7 o'clock, and I've just started my shift when a nurse from the intensive care unit calls in a panic. We have a patient here with a heart rate of 8 beats per minute. Maybe the machine is broken? I tell her to check it on another patient. It shows normal. I run to see an elderly woman lying calmly, breathing evenly, even smiling. Is something wrong, daughter? With a pulse of 8 beats, a person should be unconscious. A normal pulse is 60 to 100, but here the heart beats once every 7 seconds. How does the brain get oxygen? I call a cardiologist urgently. He arrives, looks at the monitor, and says, "Complete atrioventricular block, the heart is barely alive." We prepare her for a pacemaker, but she refuses. "I'm already old. Why do I need a piece of iron in my heart?" We persuaded her for 3 hours, relatives, doctors, a priest. Finally, she agrees. The operation was successful, and a week later, her heart rate was normal. She felt great. Now he jokes, "I've become like a robot. I run on a battery, but this battery gives me another 10 years of life." The cardiac surgeon said, "With such a pulse, she should have died weeks ago, but her heart fought to the last." Story 7. I'm on the night shift in toxicology, drinking coffee and doing a crossword puzzle, when a lab technician comes in with round eyes. "Look at this alcohol." On the screen, 0.6 ppm, but not a one-time test, but daily for a year. I look at the medical history. The patient works, has a family, no one suspects his condition. At this level, a normal person would be in a coma, but he is functioning. The liver has adapted so much that it processes ethanol as the main fuel. The narcologist said, "The body has forgotten how to live without alcohol." Detoxification lasted 6 months, tremors, hallucinations, insomnia. But he overcame it. Now he leads a group of Alcoholics Anonymous and has the best recovery statistics in the city. Story 8. I'm playing chess with a colleague in the residence room when a nurse comes in like a hurricane. Oxygen is 44% and the patient is talking. With a normal rate of 95 to 100%, this means critical hypoxia. A person should be unconscious. We run to the ward. A girl in her 20s is sitting there, smiling, asking about lunch. Triple infection, flu, strep sore throat, and bilateral pneumonia. With such oxygen, the brain should die in minutes, and she is planning what she will do after discharge. She needs a ventilator urgently and a medical coma for 4 days. The intensivist said, "I have never seen such resistance to hypoxia in 20 years of practice." When I woke up, the first question I asked was, "Why is everyone so concerned? I'm alive." Geneticists found a rare mutation, an increased affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. The body used the little oxygen that remained more efficiently. Now she is a mountain climber and says, "My superpower is to breathe where others are suffocating." Story 9. A patient with a heart rate of 8 beats reads a newspaper. Why is everyone panicking? With this heart rate, the heart beats once every 8 seconds. "Grandpa, you're like a turtle, slowly but surely," the nurse jokes. After the pacemaker, now I am a robot, but a living robot. Story 10. The analyzer freezes for 5 minutes. This has never happened in 10 years of work. I restart, calibrate, and run the blood sample again. The result? CK 278,000 with a normal value of up to 200. The young construction worker's muscles literally melted after an active weekend in the gym. Rhabdomyolysis of this degree happens once a year in a big city. The products of muscle tissue breakdown poison the kidneys and threaten to kill him. Resuscitation, hemodialysis, liters of solutions. Geneticists found a mutation, a violation of glycogen metabolism in the muscles. The guy now does yoga instead of strength training. My muscles taught me that strength is not in iron but in the mind. Story 11. It's lunchtime, and they are eating salad when the intensive care nurse comes running in out of breath. Lactate is off the charts. I drop the food, run to look. The analyzer shows error. It cannot measure such a high level. I program it to the maximum, 45. With a norm of 2, this means that the patient's body is burning alive. Sepsis against the background of pancreatic cancer, the cells suffocate without oxygen. The oncologist shrugs. Theoretically, she should have died 3 days ago. But the grandmother fought like a lioness. She held her grandson's hand, smiled at the nurses. Her lactate was rising, but she did not give up. When she left a week later, the whole intensive care unit stood silent. This woman showed what the power of the spirit means against the biochemistry of death. Story 12. A woman with TSH 0.001 is shaking. I'm just nervous. Nervous? Your thyroid works like a nuclear power plant. You can heat the house, the endocrinologist jokes. After treatment, better calm than vibrating. Story 13. I'm celebrating my birthday in a restaurant with my family when my phone keeps ringing. I'm sorry to bother you, but here in the intensive care unit, the lactate is over 40. With a norm of up to 2, this means complete metabolic collapse, cell death from lack of oxygen. I leave the cake and look at the food. The analyzer shows error. It is not designed for such numbers. I reprogram to the maximum, 48. The patient is a woman with sepsis on the background of pancreatic cancer. The body was literally burning from the inside. The cells were turning into lactic acid. With such a lactate, people die in hours, and my grandmother lasted a week. Every day the lactate increased, and she did not give up. She held her grandson's hand, smiled at the nurses, and told them about her life. The oncologist said, "It's medically impossible, but the human spirit is stronger than biochemistry." When she left, the entire intensive care unit stood silent. This woman showed what real willpower is. Her story has become a legend in the department. The grandmother who defeated lactate with her spirit. Story 14. I'm reading a book in the park, enjoying the silence when the head of endocrinology calls. Can you come here? My thyroid is working like a nuclear reactor. TSH less than 0.001 with a normal range of 0.44 means a thyrotoxic crisis. Eating, a woman in her 40s is shaking like a leaf. Her heart beats 180 beats per minute. The thyroid gland produces hormones 10 times more than normal. At this level, convulsions, coma, and cardiac arrest should occur. How she walked to the hospital is amazing. I found out that she had been taking natural weight loss supplements from the internet for a year. It turned out that they contained thyroid hormones in horse doses. My body was accelerating like a motor without brakes. Urgent thyroid blockers, beta blockers for the heart. 3 weeks of fighting for every beat. Gradually, the hormones normalized. The tremors disappeared. The woman says, I wanted to lose weight, but I almost died. Now I know that beauty is not worth living. Endocrinologists show her case as an example of the dangers of natural drugs of unknown origin. Story 15. The last day before my vacation, I want to go home as soon as possible when they bring urgent biochemistry from the children's department. I look at the sodium level, 180, while the norm is 135 to 145. The 8-year-old boy's seizures have intensified and his parents are in a panic. I asked the mother about the diet. It turns out that she had read in the blog of a health guru about the benefits of sea salt for children with epilepsy. She added it to all food to strengthen the nervous system. The little body could not cope. The brain swelled from excess salt, a salt-free diet, intravenous drips, and gradual normalization. A week later, the seizures stopped. The neurologist said, Internet medicine almost killed the child. The mother now writes a blog about the dangers of self-medication based on advice from social media. Story 16. A grandmother brings her grandson for an EEG. The boy complains of headaches. He's cute, smart, and talks about school while preparing. I turn on the machine and am stunned. A seizure every 30 seconds. At the same time, the child speaks normally, jokes, and is not even aware. How did he get to drive his father's scooter? I urgently call a neurologist. It turned out to be an absence, a blackout of consciousness without seizures. After treatment, the boy confessed, "Now I understand why I missed half of the lessons at school, although I was present." Story 17. A boy with a hematocrit of 85% said, "The blood is thick." Thick? Your blood is like ketchup. You can open a tomato factory, the hematologist jokes, after the bloodletting. Better liquid blood than a thick problem. Story 18. It's Saturday, 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm planning to go to the dacha when a commotion starts in the lab. Look at this sodium. Maybe the machine is broken? I go to the analyzer, 555, while the norm is 135 and 145. I think, a technical error. I retest the sample. The result is the same. I take a new blood sample, 555 again. I have not seen such a level of sodium in 20 years of work. I run to the patient in the therapeutic department. A middle-aged man is lying on the bed, pale but conscious. I ask him how he feels. "I don't feel well at all. With such sodium, the brain should swell, the man should fall into a coma." I call the resuscitator, prepare drips to lower the sodium. It has to be done carefully. A sharp fall can cause brain swelling. We are about to start treatment when the patient suddenly says, "Doctor, I feel really bad," and closes his eyes forever. The heart could not withstand such an electrolyte imbalance. We find out the reason. The man had been taking huge doses of saline laxatives for a week because of constipation, plus drinking little water. The body was oversaturated with sodium to a critical level. This case changed my attitude to simple electrolytes. Now I know that even ordinary salt can kill. Story 19. The laboratory is buzzing like a beehive. They brought blood that looks like thick sour cream. I take the test tube, turn it over. It does not flow, but slowly slides down the walls. Platelets are 1,600, while the norm is 150, 400. The patient is an old man who came to the hospital on his own because he feels a little lightheaded during his morning walk. By taxi. With such a blood viscosity, the heart was going to rupture under the strain. The heart surgeon was in disbelief. How did he even get to the taxi? It turned out to be polycythemia. The bone marrow was producing blood cells like crazy. A month of treatment, then 5 times coronary artery bypass grafting. Now my grandfather jokes, "I was disassembled like a car and put back together again. Now I work like a new one." Story 20. An old man with a bilirubin level of 450 asks, "Why does everyone say I glow?" "Because you are a living flashlight. With this bilirubin you can read in the dark." Saves on electricity, the nurse jokes. Its yellowness was visible from the corridor. Story 21. I'm sitting in the lobby reading a newspaper, drinking coffee, when a laboratory assistant from the night shift calls. "I'm sorry to wake you up, but your bilirubin is 450. With a normal value of up to 20, this means that the liver has completely stopped. I dress quickly. The patient, an alcoholic with 20 years of experience, is lying yellow as a lemon. His skin, eyes, even nails are all golden yellow. With such a bilirubin level, a person should be in a hepatic coma. But he is conscious, talks, even jokes. "Doctor, they say I glow in the dark." The liver cirrhosis is in the terminal stage. The organ has turned into scar tissue. The bile is not processed, accumulates in the blood, and stains the whole body. At this level, the toxin should poison the brain. It is a mystery how he is still holding on. Hepatoprotectors and detoxification are urgently needed, but the prognosis is grim. A week later, the patient dies, but he lived his last days consciously. The hepatologist said, "The liver is the hardiest organ. It fights to the last cell." His jaundice was so intense that students came from other cities to see the Golden Man. Story 22. A patient with a potassium of 9.8 jokes. Doctor, maybe I'm a Superman? With such a potassium, the heart should have stopped. It turns out that he had been eating only bananas for a week for health. Cardiologist, you've almost become a banana man. Now he says, bananas are delicious, but not for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Story 23. Helping my son with his chemistry homework, explaining about electrolytes when the phone is ringing off the hook. Urgently to endocrinology, here A1C is 24%. With a norm of up to 5.7%, this means that the patient has been living in sugar syrup for months. I leave the textbooks and food. An 80-year-old grandfather is sitting on the bed telling the nurse about his grandchildren. With such an A1C, the blood should be as thick as honey. I find out that he is a diabetic with 40 years of experience, but for the last year he has been forgetting about his medications because he was tired of injections. He ate as usual, borscht with bread, potatoes with meat, tea with sugar, and cookies. Without insulin, all the sugar accumulated in my blood for months. It was incredible how my heart pumped with this syrup. With such glucose, kidneys should fail, eyesight should deteriorate, and gangrene should begin. But my grandfather kept going by sheer willpower. We gradually adjusted his insulin therapy, and in a month his A1C dropped to 12. The endocrinologist said, "This man has rewritten the textbooks of diabetology. People do not survive with such sugar." Grandpa jokes, "The sweet life almost killed me, but now I know the value of health." Story 24. An old man with a spleen of 30 centimeters says, "My belly is big." "Big? You have a watermelon growing there." "You can open a vegetable shop," the surgeon jokes. After the treatment, better a small spleen than a huge problem. Story 25. A midwife with 20 years of experience was stunned by the results of the delivery. Postpartum blood pressure was 312/199. The woman was supposed to die of a stroke during labor. How did she give birth to a healthy baby with such a pressure? Urgent need for clividipine, magnesia, and an intensive care team. The woman's brain withstood the impossible load. A week later, the pressure normalized on its own. The gynecologist said, "The mother's body is capable of miracles. She gave birth to a child contrary to the laws of physiology." The baby is healthy, and the mother now carefully monitors her blood pressure. Story 26. A patient with lead 150 complains, "My head is heavy." "Heavy? Your brain is like a lead bullet." "You can cast ammunition," the toxicologist jokes. After cleansing, "Now my head is as light as a down jacket." Story 27. Platelets less than 1. The girl was wrapped in bubble wrap. Any touch could cause bleeding, TTP, when the blood does not clot at all. She was taken to the intensive care unit like a glass toy. Plasmapheresis treatment saved his life. A month later, her platelets normalized. The girl jokes, "I was the most fragile person on the planet, but I survived." Story 28. A 19-year-old girl's blood pressure was 60/40. The nurse checked it 3 times, then ran out of the room. She brought the whole team of doctors. The girl sat quietly. "What's wrong?" It turned out that she had chronically low blood pressure, a family trait. The doctor said, "You're like a turtle. You'll live slowly, but for a long time." Now she jokes, "My blood pressure is like a teacher's salary, low but stable." Story 29. I'm cooking dinner and frying potatoes when my wife comes into the kitchen. "Urology called you 3 times." I wipe my hands and call back. The urologist is in a panic. "Come quickly, there are solid crystals in the patient's urine." I thought, it's just common salts, what's so strange? But the food is really snowing under the microscope. The crystals fill the entire field of view, nothing else is visible. Urine looks like a cloudy jelly. The patient is a truck driver who has been traveling through the deserts for a year, drinking little water and eating salted meat. The kidneys stopped working and the salts began to crystallize right in the urinary tract. With such a concentration, kidney failure was about to begin. How we got to the hospital is a miracle. Urgently, liters of fluid intravenously, diuretics, kidney lavage, a week under intravenous drips, gradual dissolution of crystals, a repeated urine test, clear as a tear. The driver now carries a 5-liter canister of water in the cab. My kidneys are like a car radiator, they boil without water. Nephrologists show his crystals to students as an example of a critical water-salt imbalance. Story 30. An old man comes to donate urine, and there are thousands of live bugs floating in it. Doctor, I'm still a fighter at 89. It turns out that he had retrograde ejaculation after surgery. The urologist said, Grandpa, your sperm quality is like that of an Olympian. Grandma jokes, now it's clear why he's so cheerful. Everything goes wrong. Story 31. A guy with triglycerides of 12,000 asks, why is the blood white? Because you are half milk. You can open a dairy plant, the lab technician jokes. After the diet, now I understand that white does not always mean purity. Story 32. Thursday, the end of the shift, I'm packing my things to go home when the phone rings from the children's department. Can you come and look at the analysis? There is something unreal with glucose. Reluctantly, I go. I think the child has ordinary diabetes. What's so strange? I look at the result. The glucose is above 600, but the analyzer cannot show the exact figure. It says no. I reconfigure the device to the maximum range, 1654, with a normal range of 3.5–5.5 mmol. This means that the child's blood has turned into sugar syrup. I run to the patient. A 10-year-old boy is lying lethargic, breathing frequently and shallowly, smelling of acetone. Classic diabetic coma, ketoacidosis. I ask his parents. It turns out that a week ago he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, prescribed insulin, and taught to inject. But the parents decided to try natural treatment first. They read on the internet about the miraculous properties of juices and fruits in diabetes. Instead of insulin, they fed the child orange juice without sugar and McDonald's milkshakes for thirst. Orange juice, even without added sugar, is concentrated fructose, and milkshakes are liquid candy. In diabetes, it's like injecting sugar directly into a vein. Urgently to the intensive care unit, insulin drip, fight against ketoacidosis. For 3 days between life and death, glucose dropped by 200 units per day. The body was gradually cleansed of toxins. On the 4th day, the child woke up, asked for water, and asked, Mom, why am I here? The endocrinologist told the parents about the danger of their experiments, and the mother cried, We wanted the best. We were afraid of chemistry, and we almost lost our son. Story 33. Friday, the end of the shift. I want to go home when they bring an emergency test. The test results are 212,000 with a normal value of up to 200, 1,000 times higher. The patient is a young athlete who overdid it a bit during training. Rhabdomyolysis, the muscles literally disintegrate, the decay products poison the kidneys. Urgently to the intensive care unit, liters of solutions to flush the kidneys. A week later, he was sent to the Mayo Clinic, suspicion of a rare disease. The diagnosis was confirmed, McArdle's syndrome, a disorder of glycogen metabolism in the muscles. The guy now goes swimming instead of strength training and says, My muscles taught me to listen to my body. It is smarter than my ambitions. Story 34. My first year in the lab almost ended in a scandal because of flu Z. I ran to the head nurse with the result. We have a positive flu Z. She turns pale and grabs the phone to call the Center for Disease Control. I think, oh my God, what kind of new deadly strain is this? We call a consultation, call an epidemiologist. An hour later, it turns out that the laboratory technician made a mistake and pressed the wrong letter. It's just influenza A, but with our panic, we could have quarantined the whole city. The student intern still recalls this story as a lesson in mindfulness. Story 35. Ferritin 1 is 1, not 10, not 100, but exactly 1. The patient hadn't been coming to the doctor's office for 2 years, was bleeding from hemorrhoids every day, and complained of fatigue. Of course you are tired, I thought. You have 0 iron. The man looked like a ghost, but continued to work. When we started iron treatment, he came running a week later. "Doctor, I've been resurrected. Where were you 2 years ago?" Now he regularly takes tests. Story 36. A woman with calcium 3.8 complains, "My bones hurt." "They hurt? They are turning to stone. Lady, you are a living monument," says the rheumatologist after the treatment. "Better flexible than stone." Story 37. The laboratory assistant shouts, "The blood here is like strawberry yogurt. Triglycerides of 8,000 in a cheese fan." "I thought cheese was good for you," he justifies himself. Cardiologist. "It is, but not up to a kilogram a day." Now he eats cottage cheese with spoons and says, "Everything is good in moderation, even love for cheese." Story 38. I'm watering the flowers on the balcony, enjoying the silence when my neighbor shouts, "The hospital is looking for you." I pick up the phone. The pediatrician is in a panic. "Come urgently, the child's glucose is over 1,000. At the norm of 3.5, 5.5, this means a diabetic coma. I ate quickly. The 5-year-old boy is lying lethargic, breathing rapidly, smelling of acetone, classic ketoacidosis. I ask his parents. A week ago he was diagnosed with diabetes and prescribed insulin. But my mom read on the internet and decided to try a natural treatment: honey, fruit juices, dates. With diabetes, it's like pouring gasoline on a fire. Her glucose rose to 1340 and her body was being poisoned by ketones. Urgent resuscitation, insulin drips, fight against acidosis. 3 days between life and death, the child is in a coma. On the 4th day, he wakes up and asks for toys. The endocrinologist cries with joy. A little more and it would have been too late. The mother vows never to experiment with her child's life. The internet almost killed my son. Story 39. Triglycerides 5335. The blood was like milk. The laboratory assistant said, "I see fat even before the analysis." The patient turned out to be a cheese lover. He ate kilograms of it every day. The blood was so fatty that it was settling in layers. The cardiologist joked, "You don't eat cheese, you are 90% cheese." After the diet, the indicators normalized. Now the patient says, "Cheese is a drug, but it's delicious." Story 40. A1C 19.2%. The doctors reread the result 3 times. With a normal value of 5.7%, this meant that his blood sugar had been critically high for months. The relative could barely stand on his feet, but thought he was just tired at work. When we started treatment, he lost 20 kilograms in a month. All the excess water came out. The endocrinologist said, "You were living in sugar syrup instead of blood." Now he controls diabetes and feels like he was 20 years old. Story 41. I'm cooking barbecue at the dacha with friends, enjoying nature when the cardiac resuscitation nurse on duty calls, "Sorry to bother you on your day off, but your troponin is over 50,000. With a normal level of up to 14, this means a massive heart attack when the heart collapses before our eyes. I leave the barbecue, eat quickly. The patient, a trucker in his 50s, is lying under drips, complaining of heartburn. Heartburn? With such a troponin level, half of the heart should be dead. The ECG shows total damage, anterior, posterior, and lateral walls. The heart is working at a quarter of its capacity. How he got off the highway on his own is amazing. I had to find out that the pain started yesterday, but he thought he had overeaten in the dining room. He had driven 300 kilometers with a heart attack. He urgently needed angioplasty, stenting of 3 vessels. The cardiac surgeon said, "With such a troponin level, they usually take you straight to the morgue." The trucker survives, but his heart works at half capacity. Now he carries light loads and tells his colleagues, "Guys, if you feel chest pain, don't think it's heartburn. The heart does not forgive complacency." Story 42. Thursday evening, the last test of the day, blood glucose. I look at the result and think, printer error. 1847, when the norm is 80 to 100. I reread it. Yes, almost 2,000. At this level of sugar, the blood turns into syrup. A person should be in a coma. I run to the endocrinology department. The patient, a man in his 50s, is sitting on the bed and telling his neighbor jokes. I asked him how he was feeling. Well, I'm a little weak. I thought I had a cold. A cold? With such glucose, the kidney should fail, breathing should be difficult, and consciousness should be clouded. I find out his story. He is a diabetic with 10 years of experience, but he forgot about his medication for a month and ate cakes. It was my grandson's wedding. We celebrated for a week. He was rushed to the intensive care unit, insulin by drip, gradual reduction of sugar, no sudden drops, the brain could swell. 3 days of struggle, glucose dropped by 100 units per day. When the indicators normalized, my grandfather asked, "Was the cake my daughter baked delicious?" The endocrinologist laughs. Our grandfather almost died for the cake, but his love for sweets was stronger than his coma. Now he is an activist in the diabetes community and talks about the importance of sugar control. Cake can wait, but life can't. Story 43. A woman with ferritin 1 says, "I'm just tired." Tired? She has less iron than a plastic spoon. "Madam, you are a walking magnet without iron," the doctor is surprised. After the treatment, "Now I understand what real energy is." Story 44. A pediatric endocrinologist with 30 years of experience, and she has never seen anything like this. A 10-year-old boy with a sugar level so high that the glucometer showed only HI. His parents were feeding him healthy sugar-free orange juice and McDonald's milkshakes for thirst. Sugar-free doesn't mean carbohydrate-free, and milkshakes are liquid candy. The child was on the verge of a diabetic coma. After his parents' education and insulin therapy, the boy began to grow normally. His mother was crying, "We meant well, but we almost killed our own child." Story 45. I was throwing out the garbage near the hospital at 4 in the morning after my shift when an orderly ran out of the waiting room. "Quick, run to check the sodium." I think, what a fool, but I go. The analyzer reads 555. Normal sodium is 135, 145, and here it is almost 4 times more. And we return to the patient, and he looks at us with tired eyes and says, "I don't feel well at all." He falls down right before our eyes, forever. I have seen many things in my 15 years of working in the laboratory, but this look and these last words still haunt me. Now, I always tell young doctors, electrolytes are not just numbers in a computer, they are a balance between life and death. Story 46. Thursday lunch break, a call from the intensive care unit. Lactate 40. I drop my food and run to see. The analyzer shows an error. It is not designed for such numbers. With a normal value of up to 2, this means a complete metabolic collapse. The patient is a woman with sepsis and pancreatic cancer. The body was burning from the inside. The cells were suffocating without oxygen. The tissues were turning into acid. The oncologist told the family, "Get ready for the worst." But Grandma fought like a lioness for a whole week. Every day her lactate increased, and she kept her eyes open, squeezing her grandson's hand. When she left, the ward was silent. The medical staff worshipped her strength of spirit. Her relatives do not remember her test results, but her unbreakable will to live. Story 47. Wednesday evening, the last test of the day, ferritin. I look at the result, 1. Not 10, not 100, 1. With a normal range of 2,300, this means complete depletion of iron reserves in the body. I look for a patient in the ward, a pale man in his 40s, barely able to stand. "How long have you not been coming to appointments?" 2 years, somehow. It turns out that he bleeds every day because of hemorrhoids, but there was no time to go to the doctor. His hemoglobin was 6.5, while the norm is 14 to 16. How he worked physically hard with such indicators is a mystery. He was prescribed iron supplements, and a week later he came running. "Doctor, I've come back to life. Previously, climbing to the second floor was like Everest, and now I run up the stairs." Now he regularly takes tests and jokes. Iron is more valuable than gold, at least for me. Story 48. Blood is like strawberry yogurt. I've never seen anything like it. Plasma should be transparent, but here it is a pink mess. Cholesterol was so high that the blood was stratified into fractions. The patient had been eating only fatty foods for years. The heart was pumping this sour cream through the vessels. After the diet, the blood cleared up in months. The cardiologist said, "Your blood vessels survived the cholesterol tsunami and survived." Story 49. I work in cardiac intensive care. I'm used to everything, but then the sweat came out. The patient suddenly turns blue after the surgery. His oxygen level drops to 51%. I think, embolism, heart attack? The x-ray shows a spontaneous pneumothorax, the lung deflated by itself. He was tall, thin, pale, a classic type for such a pathology. The funny thing is what he says. 51% is a passing grade. The boy thought that 51% of oxygen was like an exam. He passed, and that was good. I had to explain that there is a different grading scale, either 95% or death. Story 50. Wednesday, 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm sitting in the lab working on reports and dreaming about bed when an orderly brings a blood test tube marked urgent. It's strange, like thick jam. I take it in my hands. Indeed, the blood has the consistency of honey, slowly flowing down the walls of the tube. I run the analysis. Platelets are 1847, while the norm is 150/400. With this amount, the blood turns into jelly. The heart can barely pump this thick mass through the vessels. I look at the patient's card. A 75-year-old pensioner grandfather came to the clinic complaining of mild malaise during a morning walk. A slight malaise? With his blood viscosity, he should have had a heart attack on the first floor. I call the receptionist. It turns out that the old man arrived by taxi on his own, sits in line, reads the newspaper, and complains only that he is breathing a little hard. I urgently call a hematologist and a cardiologist. They diagnose polycythemia vera, a chronic leukemia in which the bone marrow produces blood cells like crazy. The blood thickens so much that the heart was working at its limit. A month of treatment with hydroxycarbamide, regular bloodletting to reduce the viscosity, then preparation for cardiac surgery. It turned out that he needed a 5-fold coronary artery bypass grafting. His heart vessels were clogged with clots. The operation lasted 8 hours, and the surgeon said they had never seen such thick blood in their entire career. Now the old man is living and thriving, undergoing monthly tests, taking blood thinners, and joking, "I was dismantled like an old car and reassembled. Now I work like a Swiss watch." Story 51. Blood alcohol of 0.6 ppm, 3 years in a row. This means that the patient was in a state of severe intoxication every day. At 0.3, a person loses consciousness, and he was functioning. The liver worked like an alcohol processing plant. When he stopped drinking, his body did not know how to live without alcohol. Detoxification lasted for months. Now he drinks coffee instead of vodka and says, "Caffeine is the only drug allowed." Story 52. A patient with glucose. Son 50 asks, "Doctor, why do I sleep so sweetly? With such sugar, the blood is like syrup." "Maybe because you are literally sweet," I say. It turns out that he had been celebrating his grandson's wedding with cakes for a week. Now he says, "Cake can wait, but a diabetic coma can't." Story 53. I'm standing in the shower after a hard day, soaping up, when my wife shouts from the bathroom, "You're being called urgently!" I run out with foam on my head, grab the phone. The head of the laboratory is hysterical. "Come right away, there is blood like milk." I dressed on the spot, thinking, what nonsense, blood cannot be like milk. But when I arrived, there was indeed a white liquid in the test tube, like diluted milk. The triglycerides are over 12,000, while the norm is up to 150. The lipids are so high that the blood has lost its red color. The patient is a bodybuilder who had been on an anabolic diet for a month. 5 liters of milk, a kilogram of cottage cheese, a dozen eggs a day, plus steroids for a quicker effect. The liver could not cope with such a load of fats, and the blood turned into an emulsion. With such viscosity, the heart worked like a concrete pump. The endocrinologist said, It's not blood anymore, it's a milkshake. Urgent plasmapheresis, blood purification through the machine, statins in shock doses. A week later, the blood lightened, and a month later, it became normal in color. The guy quit steroids, switched to a balanced diet, and became a trainer. Now I teach others that beauty is health, not chemistry. His milky blood has become a classic example in sports medicine of the dangers of doping. Story 54, lactate 40. The analyzer showed an error because it was not designed for such numbers. With a normal value of 2, this meant a complete metabolic collapse, a grandmother with sepsis and pancreatic cancer. The body was burning from the inside. The tissues were suffocating without oxygen. She lived a week. It's a miracle. The oncologist said, she fought like a lion until her last breath. Her family remembers her strength of spirit, not her test results. Story 55, Monday, 7 in the morning, she had just come to work and hadn't even had time to hang up her jacket when the head of the intensive care unit called, "Come here immediately, we have some strange blood here, like pink jelly." I grab my coat and run. There is indeed a test tube with something similar to strawberry mousse in the intensive care unit. The plasma is stratified with a thick layer of yellowish fat on top and pink porridge inside. I run a lipidogram. Cholesterol 28 mmol/cell with a normal value of up to 5, triglycerides 9,500. You only see such numbers in pathology textbooks. The patient is a 40-year-old man who had been experimenting with the carnivore diet for 3 months. He ate exclusively meat, lard, butter, and hard cheese. I read that our ancestors ate like this for thousands of years, he explained to his relatives. The ancestors may have eaten this way, but they lived up to 30 years. His blood turned into a fatty emulsion, and his heart pumped this sour cream through vessels with a hair's diameter. When the cardiologist saw the ECG, he said, "It's amazing how the heart can cope with such viscosity." The ultrasound showed that the heart vessels were clogged with fatty emboli, the liver was 3 times larger, and the gallbladder was clogged with stones. He was urgently prescribed statins in maximum doses, a complete ban on fats, and a diet exclusively on vegetables and cereals. The first week was difficult. The body got used to using fat as the main fuel, and withdrawal began. But gradually the indicators normalized, and in a month cholesterol dropped 5 times. The patient lost 25 kilograms, felt much better, and became a nutritionist. Now I tell people about the dangers of extreme diets. Carnivore almost killed me, but it taught me to listen to my body. Story 56. A patient with creatinine 800 said, "I just don't go to the bathroom very often." "Rarely? Your kidneys have been resting for a year." "I thought I was saving water," he excuses himself. After dialysis. Now I realize that kidneys are not batteries. They cannot be recharged once a week. Story 57. I'm lying in bed reading a detective story, enjoying the silence when my wife nudges me with her elbow. "Your lab is calling." I pick up the phone sleepily. The lab assistant is screaming in panic, "Come quickly, there is 0 ferritin." I think it's a mistake. Ferritin cannot be 0. I get dressed, eat. Indeed, the result shows less than 1 with a normal value of 2,300. This means complete depletion of iron stores in the body. I run to the patient. A woman in her 30s is lying pale as a sheet, barely breathing. She has been suffering from uterine bleeding for 3 years, but there was no time to go to the doctor. Every month she lost half a liter of blood. Her body was exhausted to the point of criticality. Her hemoglobin was 4.2, while the normal range was 12 to 16. It's incredible how she worked as a teacher, drove a car, and raised children. With such an iron deficiency, the heart works at its limit. Urgent blood transfusions, iron supplements, and bleeding treatment were required. A week later, the woman sits up in bed. "Oh my God, I forgot what it's like to breathe normally." The gynecologist operates on the fibroids, and the bleeding stops. A month later, the woman's ferritin is normal and she returns to work. Now I realize that health is more valuable than any career. Story 58. I'm sitting in a cafe with a friend discussing vacation plans when the phone rings. Can you come over? There's a pulse of 8 beats per minute. The machines must be broken. I tell him to check it on another patient. It's normal. I leave the coffee and run to see an elderly woman lying down reading a book. Her pulse is really 8. At a normal rate of 60 to 100, the heart beats once every 8 seconds. How does the brain get oxygen with such a pulse? I ask how he feels. I feel a little weak, but it's nothing. Nothing to worry about. With such a pulse, a person should be in a coma. The ECG shows a complete heart block. Electrical impulses do not pass. The heart is barely alive. The cardiologist shrugs his shoulders. Medically, it is impossible. With such a heart rate, the brain should die. We are preparing to install a pacemaker, but at first the grandmother refuses. Why do I need a piece of iron in my heart at my age? The whole team persuaded her, and she finally agreed. The operation was successful, and a week later her heart rate was 70 and she felt great. Now she jokes, I became a cyborg at the age of 80. This battery will give me another 10 years of active life. Story 59. The first day after the internship, I take the A1C result with trembling hands, 19.2%. With a normal value of up to 5.7%, this means that the patient has been living in sugar syrup instead of blood for months. I run to the head of the department and show her the test. She looks at it again, and says, "Are you sure you're not confused?" We go to the patient together. A middle-aged man is sitting on the bed complaining of fatigue. I thought I was working hard, that's why I'm tired. When we started insulin therapy, he lost 20 kilograms in a month. All the excess water came out. My sugar dropped so fast that I had to adjust my doses every day. The endocrinologist later said, it's a wonder how the heart was pumping this syrup throughout the blood vessels at all. Story 60. A surgeon looks into the patient's eyes and suddenly shouts, "To the intensive care unit now!" The pressure was 268 and 190. The man was one step away from death. The worst part is that he came only because of a fly in front of his eyes. The ophthalmologist immediately saw the retinal edema and realized that it was not his eyes, it was his brain crying for help. 3 weeks in the hospital, a heart attack during treatment, but he survived. Now he checks his blood pressure every month and tells his wife, "My eyes saved my life. They saw what my heart was hiding." Story 61. Tuesday lunch break. I'm sitting in the cafeteria with soup when the lab technician comes running. "Quick, there's strange blood like yogurt." I leave the soup and go to look at it. There is indeed something similar to strawberry yogurt in the test tube. The plasma is pink, thick, and stratified into fractions. The cholesterol is over 20 millimoles, while the norm is up to 5. The patient is a cheese fan, ate a kilogram of hard cheese every day for a year, and considered it a healthy diet. The blood has turned into a fatty emulsion. The vessels are clogged with cholesterol plaques. The cardiologist shakes his head. I wonder how the heart pumps this sour cream at all. Urgent statins, complete elimination of dairy products, diet. A month later, the blood was cleared, cholesterol dropped 3 times. The patient lost 20 kilograms and feels much better. Now he works as a nutritionist and talks about the dangers of mono diets. Cheese is delicious, but in moderation. I almost drowned in my own cholesterol. His blood has become a visual aid for medical students about the consequences of unhealthy diet. Story 62. The family doctor sent the patient just in case. He complained of fatigue. Hemoglobin 1.9 with a normal range of 12 to 15. The man did not walk but floated along the corridor but walked on his own. He refuses transfusion because of his religious beliefs. We understand that he will die without blood, but we cannot force him. He fought for 3 days. The medical staff was changing to be with him all the time. In the end, his heart gave out. But his faith was stronger than his fear of death. It impressed even the atheists among the doctors. Story 63. A woman with a methemoglobin of 70% is blue as an avatar. I was just cold. Cold? You are blue as jeans. "You could be in a movie," says the nurse. After the treatment, blue is not my color. Story 64, glucose 950. The lab technician turned white when he saw the result. "This is not the flu, it's a diabetic coma coming," the doctor said. With a normal value of 80 to 100, the patient was living in sugar syrup. Surprisingly, after 3 months, the body healed itself. The pancreas recovered. The endocrinologist shrugged his shoulders. A medical miracle that happens once in a million. Now he controls his sugar with a diet. Story 65, Saturday, 12 o'clock in the morning, a call from the laboratory. "In the 43rd ward, triglycerides are 5,335. At first, I thought it was a mistake, reread it. But no, everything is correct. I go to look at the blood. It looks like strawberry yogurt. The plasma is stratified, fat is floating in separate drops. I asked the patient about his diet. 'Doctor, I am a raw foodist.' It turns out that he eats a kilogram of hard cheese every day and considers it a healthy diet. His blood was so fatty that the laboratory assistant could determine the lipid level with the naked eye before the test. The cardiologist was telling him about atherosclerosis, and the patient asked, 'Can I at least have mozzarella?' After 3 months of dieting, his blood cleared up, but he still misses cheese." Story 66. I'm watching a romantic comedy with my wife drinking wine when the phone rings off the hook. "Urgent toxicology. There is cosmic lead in the blood." With a normal level of up to 10 micrograms per DL, the analyzer reads 150. I leave the wine and food behind. The patient, an antique furniture restorer, is lying with a severe headache. For 6 months, he had been working with old paints without a respirator, inhaling lead vapor every day. The metal poisoning developed gradually, first fatigue, then headaches, now kidney and nervous system damage. At this level of lead, the brain should swell. Chelation therapy is urgently needed, drugs that bind lead and remove it from the body. 3 weeks of treatment, gradual blood purification. The restorer is recovering, but now works only in a protective suit. You have to create beauty safely, otherwise you become a museum piece yourself. Toxicologists show his case as an example of occupational heavy metal poisoning. Story 67. A pregnant woman's blood pressure of 281/86 is when time stops. I'm an EMT. I've seen a lot, but a woman was on the verge of a stroke and the death of her child. She was rushed to the intensive care unit at lightning speed. The maternity ward was already going crazy at 160/110, and here such numbers. The child was saved by a cesarean section. Mom is now healthy, but doctors still remember this case as a lesson. Pregnancy can be deadly. Story 68. I am reading a bedtime story about a princess to my children when the head of the intensive care unit calls. "I'm sorry to disturb you at home, but the blood here is very strange, like jelly." I kiss the children, look at the food. There is indeed something similar to red jelly in the test tube. The blood is so thick that it does not flow, but slowly slides down. The hematocrit is 85%, while the norm is 40 to 50. There are so many red blood cells that there is almost no plasma in the blood. The patient is a mountain rescuer who had been working at an altitude of 5,000 meters for a month. His body adapted to the lack of oxygen and started producing red blood cells like crazy. The blood thickened to the consistency of sour cream, and the heart could barely pump this mass. With such a hematocrit, blood clots should form and strokes should start. Urgent bloodletting. We take half a liter of blood every day, replace it with saline. In a week, the hematocrit normalizes. The guy returns to work, but now he regularly goes down to sea level. The mountains taught me to respect oxygen and not to forget about sea level. Story 69. I'm brushing my teeth before going to bed, thinking about tomorrow's day off when the toxicology nurse calls. "Sorry for the late hour, but your methemoglobin is 70%. With a normal value of up to 1%, this means that hemoglobin has turned into a poison and does not tolerate oxygen. I dress quickly, eat. The patient, a locksmith in his 40s, is lying there blue as ink, but conscious. I find out that he was repairing the sewage system, breathing in hydrogen sulfide and nitrates all day without a respirator. My hemoglobin was oxidized and turned into methemoglobin, a substance that cannot carry oxygen. At this level, a person should die of suffocation. How he got to the hospital on foot is a mystery. He was immediately given intravenous methylene blue, an antidote that restores normal hemoglobin. In an hour, the cyanosis disappears and oxygen is normalized. The mechanic now works only with a respirator and tells the team, "Guys, it's better to breathe through a mask than not to breathe at all." Toxicologists are using his case as a teaching one. This is what happens when you save on protective equipment. Story 70. Troponin over 23,500. Even the laboratory analyzer gave up. In a heart attack, it is usually 50 to 100, but here it is space numbers. The patient's heart was so damaged that the cardiologist said, "It's not a heart anymore, it's a memory of a heart." The man miraculously survived but spent a month in intensive care. After his recovery, he joked, "Now I have a heart like the Terminator's, hard to kill." Story 71. An ordinary Friday in hematology turned into a scientific detective when she saw an unusual picture under the microscope. Thousands of live bugs were floating in the urine of an 89-year-old grandfather. The quality and quantity were impressive, like a 20-year-old athlete. I called my colleagues and everyone looked at me in amazement. We found out that he had retrograde ejaculation after prostate surgery. Instead of ejaculating outside, the sperm enters the bladder. I show the urologist the drug and he smiles. "Grandpa is a real fighter. We rarely see this quality of sperm even in young men." When we told the patient, he laughed. "So he is not old at all." His wife joked, "Now it's clear why he's so vigorous at his age." Story 72. "Press the red button," the nurse shouted when the pulse oximeter showed 44% oxygen in the blood. My friend was between life and death due to a triple infection: flu, sore throat, and pneumonia. She was on a ventilator for 4 days. When she woke up, the first thing she said was, "Why is everyone so upset? I'm alive." Doctors called her a miracle of medicine. Now she celebrates her Resurrection Day every year. Story 73. The patient with an alcohol level of 0.7 ppm has been functioning for 5 years in a row. I just relax. Relaxing? You are swimming in ethanol. "A living breathalyzer," says the addiction specialist. After treatment, now I relax without chemicals. Story 74. I'm lying in a hammock near the house reading a detective story when the head doctor calls. "Urgently to the toxicology department. The blood alcohol is off scale." I think, an ordinary alcoholic, what's so interesting? I look at the result, 0.7 ppm. At this level, a person should be in an alcoholic coma, and the patient is sitting there doing crossword puzzles. I find out the story. He has been drinking a bottle of vodka every day for 5 years, and his body has adapted so much that ethanol has become the main source of energy. The liver has turned into an alcohol processing plant, working in 3 shifts. At this level, a normal person would have died of poisoning, but he is functioning, working, and raising his grandchildren. When he decided to stop drinking, a real hell began. Trembling, hallucinations, seizures. The body did not know how to live without alcohol. Detoxification lasted 6 months under the supervision of a psychiatrist. Now he leads a group of Alcoholics Anonymous and has the best recovery statistics in the region. Alcohol is not life, it is an imitation of life in a chemical solution. Story 75. I'm playing tennis with a friend, enjoying the game, when a security guard comes running to the court. "The hospital is looking for you urgently." I pick up the phone. The head of the infectious diseases department is shouting, "Come, there are 180,000 leukocytes." With the norm of 4 to 10,000, this means a leukemic crisis. I leave my racket and food behind. The patient, a young programmer, is lying with a fever, complaining of fatigue. With such a number of leukocytes, the blood turns into a mess of cells. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The bone marrow produces immature white blood cells like crazy. They do not fight infections but clog blood vessels. At this level, thrombosis and bleeding should start. It is incredible how the guy is still conscious. Urgent chemotherapy, bone marrow suppression, 3 weeks between life and death, white blood cells gradually fall. A month later, he goes into remission. The programmer returns to work and creates a health monitoring app. Now I realize how important it is to listen to your body. Story 76. A grandmother with platelets. 1 asks, "Why am I wrapped in bubbles?" "Because you are more fragile than glass." "Grandma, you are now a glass lady," says the nurse. After treatment, she jokes, "I was like porcelain, now I'm like steel." Story 77. Hemoglobin 1.9. The woman came on foot. She refused to receive a blood transfusion on religious grounds. With a normal value of 12 to 14, she had almost 7 times less. How did the heart pump this water? The doctors consulted in a council. The nurses were baptized. I saw how a person was fighting against the impossible. Unfortunately, her body could not stand it, but her willpower amazed everyone. She held on to her last breath. Story 78. I was working in the laboratory when they brought a test with glucose 1750, potassium 7.9. According to the rule 8 and you are dead, but the patient was alive. The funniest thing is that I found a sea of healthy sperm in the urine of an 89-year-old man. His colleagues joked, "Grandpa is a fighter." It turned out to be retrograde ejaculation, but the quality of the seeds impressed everyone. A laboratory technician with 20 years of experience said, "I've never seen such results, even from young men." Story 79. I am on duty in the children's ward when a nurse brings the results of a boy with epilepsy. I look at the numbers and can't believe my eyes. Sodium is 180, while the norm is 135 to 145. The child's seizures have become more frequent, and his parents are in a panic. We find out that the mother, having read about the usefulness of sea salt on the internet, added it to all the child's food for health. The little body could not cope with such a load. The brain was swelling. We urgently switched him to a salt-free diet and intravenous fluids. A week later, sodium normalized and the seizures stopped. His mother was crying, "I wanted to improve his health, but I almost killed him." Now I always tell my parents, the internet is not a medical reference book. Story 80. A woman with a blood pressure of 280/186 said, "I have a little headache, but I am strong." Strong? With such a pressure, the brain should have exploded. We measure it 3 times, the same number. "Lady, you're not strong, you're just very lucky," says the cardiologist. Now she takes medication and jokes. Strength is when you know your blood pressure. Story 81. I'm lying on the couch in the waiting room watching a TV series about doctors and thinking how far their cases are from reality when the phone rings at 3 in the morning. "Urgent to the laboratory, something unreal." I sleepily reach for the analyzer. The screen shows hemoglobin 1.6. I rub my eyes thinking, am I dreaming or what? I reread it. Yes, 1.6 with a normal value of 12/15. A woman in her 80s is lying in the waiting room, conscious, talking, even smiling at the nurses. With such a hemoglobin, a person should be unconscious or dead. The blood can hardly carry oxygen. I call the head of the department. He arrives in half an hour, looks at the result, and says, "Retake it." I pass again, 1.5, and again, 1.7. The machine does not make mistakes. We go to the patient together. The grandmother talks about her grandchildren and complains of weakness. "Old age is not a joy, son." With this hemoglobin level, she shouldn't be able to talk, but should be fighting for every breath. We offer her a blood transfusion. She refuses categorically because of her religious beliefs. She fought for 3 days. Her heart was pumping water instead of blood. The medical staff was changing at her bedside. Everyone realized it was the end. But her calmness and faith amazed even the cynics among the doctors. When she left, the head doctor said, "You see such strength of spirit once in a decade." Story 82. For 3 years now, I have been giving a lecture to students about normal blood counts when a laboratory assistant comes into the classroom with teary eyes. Professor, please look at this hemoglobin. I take the test, 1.2, while the norm is 12 to 16. At this level, the blood does not carry oxygen. A person should be in a coma. We go to the patient as a group. A woman in her 30s is lying there smiling, asking me to bring her a book. Aplastic anemia, the bone marrow has stopped producing red blood cells. With such hemoglobin, the heart beats idly, pumping practically water. It is not clear how the brain gets oxygen. The hematologist shrugs his shoulders. Theoretically, she should have died a month ago. A bone marrow transplant from her twin sister saved her life. 6 months later, her hemoglobin normalized. The patient became a bone marrow donor and says, "Now I know what it means to be born a second time." Story 83. A guy with a hematocrit of 25,000 says, "I just overdid it in the gym." Overdid it? My muscles melted. "Son, you didn't train, you melted," the doctor jokes. Now he does yoga. My muscles taught me to listen to my body, not the iron. Story 84. Sodium 555 is the number that changed my life. The patient looked at us and said, "I don't feel well," and he fell down, forever. I have been in medicine for 15 years, but I remember this moment every second. The normal sodium level is 135 to 145, and here it was almost 4 times more. The body simply could not withstand such an imbalance. Now, I always tell my students, electrolytes are not just numbers, they are life. Story 85. I am watching TV with my son discussing a football match when the nephrologist calls. "Sorry to bother you, but your creatinine is 800. At a rate of up to 120 micromoles per liter, this means terminal renal failure. I eat quickly. The patient, a middle-aged construction worker, is sitting in bed reading a newspaper. With such a creatinine level, toxins should accumulate in the blood, and the person should fall into a uremic coma. I find out that he hadn't seen a doctor in 5 years despite feeling worse. My kidneys were gradually failing, and my creatinine was rising for months. The body adapted to chronic poisoning by its own toxins. At this level, people usually die from cerebral edema. Dialysis is urgently needed, blood purification through a machine. After the first procedure, the patient says, "God, I forgot what a clear head is." Now he goes for dialysis 3 times a week and advises his colleagues, "Guys, kidneys are the filter of life. Take care of them." Story 86. I'm frying eggs at 6 in the morning before my shift when the phone rings. "We have a patient with a potassium of 9 whole 8. Is it even possible?" I think a laboratory mistake. With a potassium of more than 8, a person should be dead. But I look at the food. An old man in his 70s is sitting on the bed telling jokes to his roommate. With a potassium level of 3.5, 5.0, this level means instant cardiac arrest. I find out that he missed 3 dialysis sessions because he was reluctant to go to the hospital and ate bananas, potatoes, dried apricots, everything rich in potassium. His kidneys were not working and potassium had been accumulating for weeks. How the heart still beats is a mystery of physiology. Dialysis and potassium-binding drugs were urgently needed. During the procedure, my grandfather jokes, "Doctor, I'm not dead, so it's still early." The nephrologist says, "With such potassium, the heart should have stopped a week ago, but this organism is a real phenomenon." Now the old man goes to dialysis religiously and tells other patients, "Potatoes are life. Choose wisely." The cardiologist still shows his ECG to his students as an example of the human body being capable of the impossible. Story 87. Monday morning. The first test is a blood alcohol level of 0.6 ppm. I think, another drunk, but I look further, this level for 3 years, every day. At 0.3 ppm, a person loses consciousness, and he was functioning, working, communicating with his family. His liver became a living ethanol processing plant. When he decided to stop drinking, his body did not know how to live without a constant dose of alcohol. Detoxification lasted 6 months. He had trembling hands, insomnia, hallucinations. The narcologist said he didn't drink. He existed in ethanol like a fish in an aquarium. Now he drinks coffee instead of vodka, works in a rehabilitation center, and helps others. Alcohol is not life. It's an imitation of life. Story 88. I'm washing my car in the yard, listening to music, when a neighbor shouts from the balcony, "Your phone is ringing off the hook." I wipe my hands and pick up the phone. The pediatric resuscitator is in shock. Come immediately, the child's calcium is 3 whole 4. With the norm of 2.2, 2.6 mmol/sil, this means a hypercalcemic crisis. I throw a soap sponge and run. The 7-year-old girl is lying lethargic, complaining of nausea. Such a concentration of calcium in the blood destroys the kidneys, heart, and brain. I find out from her parents. Her mother had read a blog about the usefulness of calcium for children's growth, and for a month she gave her daughter 10 calcium tablets daily plus a liter of milk. She wanted her to grow up healthy and tall. In case of an overdose, calcium turns into a poison and is deposited in the organs as a limestone plaque. The heart barely contracts and the kidneys become clogged with crystals. Urgent drips to dilute the blood, diuretics to remove the excess. 3 days of fighting for every heartbeat. Gradually, the calcium is normalized and the organs recover. The girl recovers and says to her mother, "Mom, I was already tall." The endocrinologist now uses this case to lecture parents. Even vitamins can kill in case of overdose. Story 89. A patient with A1C 19% out asks, "Why do ants stick to me?" "Because you are living sugar. At this rate, blood is like honey." "You can open an apiary," the endocrinologist jokes. Now he controls his sugar. It's better to be sour than dead sweet. Story 90. I'm washing the dishes after dinner when my wife says, "They're looking for you from the hospital." I pick up the phone. The laboratory assistant is in a panic. "Come, there is sodium 555. The machine must have broken down." I calibrate the analyzer, run control samples, and everything works perfectly. I retest the patient's blood and get the same result. At the norm of 135 to 45, such sodium means critical dehydration of the brain. I go to the patient. A middle-aged man is lying pale but conscious. "Doctor, I feel very bad." With such a sodium level, the brain should shrivel up from dehydration, and the person should fall into a coma. I find out the reason. I had been taking double doses of salt laxatives for a week because of constipation, plus drinking little water because of a kidney stone. The body was saturated with sodium to the point of death. We are preparing intravenous drips for a gradual decrease. It is impossible to do it abruptly. The brain can swell. We start treatment when the patient suddenly says, "That's it, I can't take it anymore," and closes his eyes forever. The heart could not withstand the electrolyte chaos. This case changed my attitude to safe medicines forever. Now I know that even laxatives can kill. Story 91. A woman with a hemoglobin of 1.9 comes on foot. A little weak. A little? She has less blood than water. "Madam, you're a walking medical phenomenon," says the hematologist. She refuses the transfusion but says, "The main thing is positive thinking." Story 92. I'm playing with my grandson in a construction set, building a castle, when the head of hematology calls, "Can you come here? There is a spleen the size of a watermelon." I am surprised. The spleen cannot be the size of a watermelon. But I eat. The ultrasound really shows a spleen of 30 centimeters, while the norm is 12. The patient is a physics teacher complaining of heaviness in the stomach. I find out that he has chronic leukemia, which he had not known about for 10 years. The spleen has been growing gradually, compensating for the work of the diseased bone marrow. Now it occupies half of the abdominal cavity. It is incredible how he could carry such a huge weight. White blood cells were 180,000, while the norm was up to 10. The bone marrow was producing white blood cells like crazy. Chemotherapy is urgently needed, and in a month the spleen shrinks by half. The teacher returns to work and tells his students, "You see, children, even the spleen can grow to the size of a watermelon if you don't take care of your health." His case was included in hematology textbooks as an example of an asymptomatic course of leukemia. Story 93. I play soccer with my kids in the yard, enjoy my Saturday when my wife leaves the house. You are urgently called from hematology. I reluctantly go. It's Saturday. I want to rest. I look at the test results. Platelets are less than 1, while the norm is 150/400. This means that the blood does not clot at all. I run to the patient. A girl of 18 is lying there wrapped in bubble wrap. Any touch can provoke a fatal bleeding. TTP is thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura, an autoimmune disease. The immune system destroys its own platelets faster than they can be formed. With this number of platelets, bleeding can start from sneezing. Urgent plasmapheresis, hormones, immunosuppressants. A week in the intensive care unit like with a glass toy. Gradually, platelets began to grow. 5, 15, 50. A month later, the numbers normalized. The girl became a nurse and said, "Now I realize how fragile our health is and how important every drop of blood is." Story 94. A patient with lactate 45 says, "My stomach feels a little sour." Sour? You are turning into vinegar from the inside. With this lactate, the body burns alive. The doctor, "You are not sour, you are a volcano." He lived another week. At least I was like a sparkler. Story 95. 37 weeks of pregnancy, a scheduled consultation. Everything is going according to plan when the midwife checks the blood pressure monitor 3 times and calls for the head of the department. The pressure is 280/186. Numbers you only see in pathology textbooks. During pregnancy, we start to panic at 140/90, and here, the woman sits quietly and says, "I have a bit of a headache, but it's nothing terrible." No big deal. She is on the verge of eclampsia, stroke, placental abruption. Urgently to the maternity ward, a cesarean section. The child was born healthy and the mother spent a week in intensive care. When her blood pressure normalized, she confessed, "I thought headaches were normal for pregnant women." Now her son is 5 years old and she has become an activist for the education of future mothers. Story 96. A guy with a white blood cell count of 18,000 says, "I have a little fever." A little? You have a revolution in your blood. The white blood cells have organized a parade, the hematologist jokes. After chemotherapy, the revolution is over, peace has come. Story 97. My grandmother falls 50 times a day with glucose. I'm just getting older. Older, your sugar is like a roller coaster. "Grandma, you are a living glucometer," says the endocrinologist. After treatment, better stable than extreme. Story 98. 3 years ago, my mother fell into a coma due to sleep apnea. The AHI showed 127. She did not breathe every half minute during the night. The longest pause lasted 77 seconds. When she was put on CPAP, she lost 35 kilograms and became herself again. Now I tell her, "Mom, you won the no breathing competition." She laughs, but I still remember that call from the doctor. "Come here immediately." Story 99. Grandpa with sodium 555 says, "It tastes salty in my mouth." Salty? With that sodium, he should have been a pillar of salt. "Grandpa, you've almost become living salt," the doctor said. He died a minute later, but managed to make a joke. "At least I will be useful for the road in winter." Story 100. The EEG showed seizures every 30 seconds and the patient was talking calmly. He arrived by himself, driving, joking with the nurses. "How are you feeling?" "Great." Meanwhile, his brain was short-circuiting without a break. When they showed the recording, the man turned white. "I didn't feel anything." He was prescribed therapy. A month later, the seizures disappeared. Now he says, "I guess my brain just wanted to draw attention to itself."